Okay, let's unpack this. When we think about law in ancient Athens, our minds often jump to, theft, maybe property lines, but there was this other really profound challenge they faced. How does a society that's theoretically built on citizen equality handle acts of just pure contempt, sheer arrogance turned into action?
Yeah, and that specific kind of acted out contempt, it actually had a name
Yeah.
and a legal framework. It was hubris. And in the Athenian system, hubris wasn't just like garden variety arrogance, although that's certainly related. No, it was a specific public crime. The technical term was the graphe hybreos, and it described an act of, let's say, wanton violence or deliberate humiliation. The key thing was the intent to degrade a fellow citizen.
Right, that intent to degrade seems crucial. So it wasn't just about the physical harm, maybe. It was about the message.
Exactly. It was an assault on the person's standing, their honor, their dignity within the poles of the community. When someone committed hubris, they were basically saying through their actions, I'm better than you. The rules don't apply to me in the same way. I can treat you with contempt.
And that strikes right at the heart of the democratic ideal, doesn't it? If everyone's supposed to be equal under the law.
Precisely. It's fundamentally anti-democratic in spirit. And our sources, the speeches from court cases, the legal commentaries, they show that Athenian legal practice usually applied this term hubris to two main kinds of really damaging behavior.
Okay, what were they?
Well, first, there was physical assault against free persons, especially assaults done in a way that really maximized the public shame involved. It wasn't just hitting someone, it was hitting someone to humiliate them.
Publicly. Got it.
And the second category, which often overlapped and was seen as maybe even more devastating, was conduct related to sexual violence or sexual aggression or violations of what they saw as sexual honor. These were the kinds of acts that most profoundly attacked a citizen's status, their family's honor, everything.
Wow. Okay. So our task today, our deep dive, it's not just defining a word. We're really trying to get inside the regulatory machinery of this early democracy. How did they actually try to fight back against these acts? How did the law, the social norms, the way people argued in public, how did all that mobilize to combat something so corrosive?
Yeah, we're essentially looking at how they tried to legislate mutual respect, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, trying to enforce democratic equality among citizens who were, let's be honest, fiercely competitive and status-driven.
So we're investigating honor, but honor as a legal concept, as something the state actively tried to regulate.
That's the mission.
Now, to really get a grip on how powerful this charge of hubris, the graphe hybreos, could be, we absolutely have to understand the setting, the Athenian courtroom, because it just wasn't like our modern courts at all.
Not even close. We tend to assume that law is this fixed structure, right? The judge figures out the facts, finds the relevant statute, applies it, verdict. Athenian justice was much more fluid, much more political, you could say.
So who actually made the decisions? You mentioned judges.
Well, they called them dikastai. But think less judge in our sense and more jurors. Massive juries, in fact. Often hundreds of citizens, chosen by lot. Totally random.
Hundreds. Wow.
Yeah. And their job was to reach a verdict, sure. But here's the twist. The laws that the speakers brought up in court, they were tools of persuasion. They weren't absolutely binding in the way a modern statute is supposed to be.
Okay, wait. If the law isn't strictly binding, what's the point of citing it? What's the speaker, the orator, actually doing up there?
He's arguing, he's trying to convince this massive jury that his interpretation of the law and his interpretation of the opponent's actions under that law is the right one, the most just one, the most beneficial one for the city.
So it's more about rhetoric and less about technical legal application.
To a large extent, yes. Athenian laws often lack those super precise definitions we expect. Terms like hubris, well, their exact boundaries were open to interpretation by the court in that specific case. So the orator had to connect the dots, weave the facts of the incident together with these broader ideas about morality, civic duty, what's good for Athens.
He wasn't just presenting evidence then, he was selling a whole worldview, almost.
That's a great way to put it. He was making a case for a particular understanding of justice and the community's values.
Which means going to court wasn't just this, dry legal procedure. It sounds intensely social.
Oh, absolutely. It was deeply embedded in their agonistic culture. That's their love of competition, of contests. The sources really show litigation wasn't separate from social conflict. It was just another arena for it. A way for people to define themselves publicly, show their strength, jostle for position in that social hierarchy.
So bringing a lawsuit was like continuing a feud by other means.
Very much. You're airing your grievances, yes, but you're also performing for an audience of your peers. You're trying to prove your worth.
So if I'm up there arguing my case in front of, say, 501 fellow citizens, my argument can't just be he violated law ABC.
No way. It has to be much bigger.
It has to be more like, this guy didn't just wrong me, he offended our shared values. And by the way, let me tell you why I'm the better citizen, the one who actually contributes to the city.
That's the core strategy, exactly. The litigants constantly made claims about who was the superior citizen, who'd performed more public services, the liturgies, or, conversely, who had done less harm to the state. It went way beyond just the specific incident that sparked the lawsuit.
And these juries, these dikastai, what were they told to base their decisions on? Just the law and the facts?
Well, the orators certainly encouraged them to think more broadly. Athenian lawmakers themselves, historically, they didn't just think about abstract justice when making laws. They also considered the practical advantage, the symphoron, for the city.
Advantage.
Yes. And speakers like Aeschines explicitly told juries they should decide cases based on both what was just and what was advantageous, what was beneficial for Athens as a whole.
Hold on. If I'm a juror and someone tells me to think about advantage, doesn't that push the whole thing away from objective guilt or innocence? It sounds like I'm being asked which outcome helps the city more, rather than just did he do it?
It absolutely forces a judgment about social value, about political identity. Think about it. If you're prosecuting your rich neighbor for hubris, you argue convicting him benefits all of you ordinary citizens because it shows the wealthy can't just push you around.
Okay.
But if you're the one accused, maybe you argue, look, maybe I messed up here, but think about all the good I do for the city. My services, my contributions. Athens gains more by letting me continue than it loses by punishing me for this one thing.
So the jury is constantly weighing the person's entire life and character, not just the alleged crime.
It was fundamental. Their assessment of the litigants' past actions, their reputation, their service record.
Yeah.
All of that was fair game and absolutely central to how they reached a verdict.
It sounds incredibly personal and potentially really volatile, but it tells you so much about what they valued politically.
Okay, that focus on character, on the whole person, leads us straight to the social roots of hubris. If the law was partly about enforcing democratic equality, who's usually getting accused of shattering that equality? Which group?
Well, the sources are pretty clear. The accusation of hubris was overwhelmingly aimed upwards. It was primarily a tool used to try and restrain the powerful. The typical profile of someone accused of hubris: wealthy, and often young.
Interesting. Wealth and youth. Is there a philosophical reason they linked wealth specifically with this kind of misconduct? Did they think money corrupted people?
They kind of did, yeah. Aristotle talks about this in his Rhetoric. He explicitly notes that wealth was often seen as breeding a certain tendency towards physical and sexual abuse.
Really? He makes that direct link? Yes. He connects the feeling of power and entitlement that comes with wealth to things like adultery or just wanton assaults. The idea was if you have resources, if you have connections, if you can pay fines easily, maybe you start to think you can get away with treating people badly. You feel you have the license to inflict pain or humiliation because, well, who's going to stop you effectively?
So the law against hubris, the graphe hybreos, it wasn't just about individual justice. It was acting as a kind of democratic safeguard, a check on potentially oligarchic behavior simmering within the democracy.
That's a perfect way to put it. A really critical function of this law was to send a message to those citizens, the young, rich, potentially arrogant ones who might think their status put them above the norms. The message was, the state considers the dignity of every free citizen important. Punishing hubris, and punishing it severely, was how the city drew a legal line around elite behavior.
Okay, so if hubris is this vice of arrogance, of unchecked power leading to contemptuous action, what was the virtue they held up as its opposite, especially in public life?
That would be sophrosyne. It's a complex word, often translated as restraint or temperance or self-control, maybe moderation.
Sophrosyne. And was this just about, like, not drinking too much wine, or was it bigger?
Oh, much bigger. It wasn't just personal conduct, though that was part of it. It was intensely public and political.
How so? How did sophrosyne play out in the political arena?
Well, it implied more than just not being excessive. It suggested you had the wisdom, the foresight, the moderation to handle complex situations properly. You see writers like Isocrates praising famous statesmen like Pericles for having sophrosyne. He connects Pericles' political success directly to his self-mastery.
So a leader who showed sophros sign was seen as trustworthy, someone who wouldn't let personal desires or arrogance mess up state affairs.
Exactly. If you can manage your own appetites, manage your own wealth responsibly, manage your temper, then maybe you could be trusted to manage the city's affairs.
That connects back to that idea of advantage for the city, doesn't it?
It does. A citizen demonstrating sophrosyne was someone whose personal conduct benefited, or at least didn't harm, the community. Think about the wealthy performing their public duties, their liturgies, paying for a ship or a festival chorus, doing it willingly, effectively, without making a huge fuss or trying to gain undue influence from it. That was seen as showing sophrosyne.
So it's about managing your resources, including your own impulses for the common good.
Precisely. The aim, especially for the elite, was to cultivate this reputation for sophrosyne in their everyday behavior, to maintain their own dignity while crucially respecting the dignity of others.
It sounds like the Athenians didn't just wait for someone to commit hubris and then prosecute them. They had ways to screen for these character traits before someone got into house.
They absolutely did. A key mechanism was something called the dokimazi. Think of it as a kind of legal vetting process or examination.
Balkamasi, and this was standard practice.
Mandatory for anyone about to take up public office. Before you could officially start, you had to undergo this scrutiny, usually by the council or a law court.
And what were they looking for in this dokimazi? Was it just checking citizenship papers?
That was part of it, yes. Confirming you were a legitimate citizen met the basic requirements. But critically for a discussion, they also dug into your moral and civic background. Were there accusations you'd mistreated your parents, dodged the draft, engaged in prostitution, and importantly, did you have a reputation for a notoriously discreditable life? That could cover a lot, including behavior seen as hubristic.
Wow, so even if you got lucky in the lottery because many offices were filled by lot, your actual character could still disqualify you.
Absolutely. The state showed a really fundamental concern for the moral standing, the dignity of the people who would represent it. Our sources mention that even for the office of archon, which involved mostly routine administrative stuff, men known for living disreputable lives were specifically excluded, even if the lottery picked them. It acted as a serious filter.
And this character check didn't just stop once you were in office, right?
No, definitely not. You had the dokimazi at the start, but then, crucially, after your term was up, usually a year, you faced another examination called the euthani, the accountability review.
Euthani, accountability.
Yes. This whole system, the pre-screening with dokimazi, the expectation of demonstrating sophrosyne while serving and then facing the euthani afterwards, put immense pressure on officials. It actually made high office somewhat risky. It was often unpaid, involved hard work, and if you angered powerful people during your term, they could come after you during the euthani.
So ambition had its perils.
Definitely. Some ambitious men actually avoided office for those reasons. This multi-layered scrutiny really reinforced the expectation that you had to conduct yourself honorably from start to finish.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because these ideas, hubris, sophrosyne, character tests, they weren't just philosophical talking points. They were actual weapons used in high-stakes political battles. And we have this incredible case study, the feud between the famous orator Demosthenes and this wealthy, let's just say problematic guy named Medius.
Oh, the Demosthenes-Medius case is classic. It pulls together everything we've been talking about. The blend of personal animosity and political rivalry, the use of character assassination in court, the tension between the rich elite and the ordinary citizens. All there.
So set the scene. What was the spark? What actually happened between them?
Well, there was bad blood between them for a while, mostly political differences. But the legal case blew up over a specific incident in 348 BC. Demosthenes was performing a very important public service, a liturgy. He was the choregos.
Guy who pays for and manages the chorus for a play.
Exactly. For a tragic chorus at the city Dionysia, the huge religious festival, this was a big deal. Very prestigious, very public, a major civic contribution.
So Demosthenes is there, fulfilling this solemn duty in the public eye.
And Medius, apparently driven by sheer spite and a desire to humiliate Demosthenes, walks up and strikes him, hits him in the face, publicly, during the festival, while Demosthenes is acting in this official religious capacity.
Whoa, okay, that's not just assault, that's layers of insult.
Precisely. An assault is one thing, but doing it then, there, it transformed it. It wasn't just an attack on Demosthenes the man, it was framed as an act of hubris against the city itself, disrespecting the festival, disrespecting the liturgy. It was a calculated move to degrade Demosthenes' honor at a moment of maximum visibility.
So Demosthenes obviously takes him to court using the graphe hybreos, the charge of hubris. How did he argue it? Did he focus on his own pain and suffering?
Interestingly, no, not primarily. He focused almost entirely on the political implications, on that concept of advantage, the symphoron that we talked about. Demosthenes basically told the jury, you should condemn Medius not just for my sake, but for your sake, for the benefit of the whole city.
Turning his personal grievance into a public cause. Smart.
Very smart. He positioned himself not just as a victim, but as a representative of all ordinary citizens who might suffer abuse from the arrogant wealthy. He explicitly used that common tactic, comparing his own record of service and spending his wealth for the city's benefit against Medius, portraying Medius as this luxurious, abusive bully who thought his money made him untouchable.
So the argument became, punishing Medius protects all of you from this kind of hubristic behavior from the elite.
Exactly. He framed the verdict as a test case. Are we going to let the wealthy get away with treating the democracy and its citizens with contempt, or are we going to uphold the principle of equal dignity?
That's brilliant rhetoric, tying his personal honor directly to the health and safety of the democratic community. But Medius wasn't just going to sit there and take it, was he? He must have fought back.
Oh, absolutely. Medius and his supporters knew they had to undermine Demosthenes' moral authority. They needed to find a way to attack his character, his standing as a worthy citizen.
And how did they do that? What was the weak spot they went for?
They went for the absolute foundation of Athenian citizenship, military courage. They decided to weaponize the accusation of cowardice against him.
Cowardice. Okay. How did they try to make that stick?
Sometime after the assault incident, Medius got an associate, a man named Euctemon, to bring a formal prosecution against Demosthenes. The charge was graphely pataxia, desertion of the ranks, leaving his post during a military campaign.
Desertion? That sounds incredibly serious for a public figure.
It was devastating. This wasn't a minor accusation.
What were the actual consequences if someone was convicted of desertion or cowardice in general?
The penalty was typically atemia, the complete loss of civic rights, permanently.
Atemia. What did that mean in practice?
It meant political death.
Yeah.
You couldn't speak in the assembly, couldn't hold office, couldn't bring lawsuits. You essentially stopped being a functioning citizen. It was a complete disgrace and exclusion. Throwing away your shield and battle graphe speedos could also lead to this.
So Medius' strategy was, you accuse me of hubris. Fine, I'll prove you lack the most fundamental virtue of a citizen courage. And if I can do that, your whole case against me collapses because you are revealed as unworthy.
Exactly. It's a perfect illustration of how these concepts of honor, virtue, hubris, courage, cowardice, they weren't just abstract ideas. They were the currency of political warfare, constantly contested and legally deployed to build up or tear down reputations among the Athenian elite.
It really shows that your status wasn't guaranteed by birth or wealth alone. You had to constantly perform citizenship, especially military duty, to maintain it.
Your standing was always potentially fragile.
Yeah.
You had to demonstrate your worthiness, particularly through courage and service. If you failed that public test, everything else could crumble.
That intense focus on military failure, desertion, cowardice as this ultimate betrayal of citizenship, it brings us nicely to our next area, how Athens tried to protect the civic body itself. If hubris was the crime of looking down on your fellow citizens, then failing your military duty was like abandoning them altogether.
Absolutely. You have to remember, Athens was fundamentally a citizen-soldier state. Its democracy, its survival depended on citizens being willing and able to fight. So yeah, our sources are full of references to problems like draft evasion, cowardice in battle, people trying to shirk their military or financial obligations related to defense. It was an ongoing struggle.
And they had specific legal tools to deal with these failures, right? You mentioned desertion.
Yes, a whole toolkit.
Yeah.
There was the graphe for simply failing to show up for the draft when called, pure draft evasion. Then the graphe lapataxu, deserting your post during the campaign, which Medius used against Demosthenes. And then maybe the most symbolically loaded one, the graphe pedos, the charge for throwing away your shield in battle.
Why was throwing away the shield seen as so uniquely shameful? It seems like self-preservation, maybe.
But in the context of hoplite warfare, the phalanx, it was much more than that. Your large shield, the aspis, didn't just protect you. It significantly protected the man standing to your left in the line. The phalanx relied on this overlapping wall of shields for its integrity. So throwing away your shield wasn't just saving yourself. It was seen as abandoning your comrades, potentially causing a break in the line, endangering everyone.
Okay, I see. It's an act of profound selfishness that threatens the collective. The ultimate act of cowardice because it puts self above group survival. They even had a name for the guy who did it, right?
Yeah, the ripsaspis, a
Yeah.
term of deep contempt.
So flipping that around, just showing up for muster, serving out your campaign honorably, that must have been seen as a primary way to prove your worth, your courage.
Absolutely. It was concrete evidence. It was a public claim to valor, to honor, in the eyes of the whole community. It explicitly set you apart from those looked down upon as stay-at-homes, the ones who found ways to avoid the risks and hardships of military service. Just appearing for muster was a performance of civic virtue.
Now, you mentioned something earlier about the courts for these military offenses. They were different, not judged by the regular lottery juries.
That's right, a very specific and important detail. These military courts were unique. They were staffed only by Athenians who had actually served on this specific campaign where the alleged offense, the desertion, the shield tossing took place.
Wow. So only veterans judged fellow veterans from the same campaign. Why set it up like that?
Well, a couple of key reasons, probably. First, it ensured the judges were knowledgeable. They knew the conditions, the dangers, the expectations of that particular campaign intimately. They couldn't be easily fooled. But maybe more importantly, it meant that judgment on military honor was being passed by the very people most invested in upholding that standard. The guys whose lives literally depended on their comrades holding the line.
Creates intense peer pressure, I imagine.
Exactly. It ensured a very high, very specific standard of honor enforcement, judged by those who had shared the same risks.
That must have made it harder then for someone like Midias to just bring a politically motivated charge of cowardice against Demosthenes and expect an easy win. The judges would have been soldiers themselves.
It definitely raised the stakes for both accusation and defense. The charge might be easy to make in the heat of political battle, but proving it convincingly to a jury of experienced comrades, much harder, especially against someone politically skilled like Demosthenes. It reflects that deep belief that military integrity was best judged by those who lived it.
Okay, so we've seen the Dakamasi check before office, these specialized military courts handling conduct during service. It really paints a picture of this layered system of accountability for anyone in a position of responsibility or civic duty.
It does. And don't forget the euthanae at the end. Even after you finished your year as, say, an archon, you weren't home free. You had to pass that final accountability review. Any citizen could step forward during the euthanae and accuse the outgoing official of mismanagement, abuse of power, financial irregularities, or just generally dishonorable conduct during their term.
And this final check could still be genuinely risky, even for a top official.
It certainly could. It served as a final reminder that the power they held was temporary, granted by the people, and subject to review. Knowing the euthanae was coming, an official, even an archon, had to be careful. They couldn't afford to make powerful enemies unnecessarily or commit blatant acts of hubris that could be brought up against them in this final public accounting.
So it's like moral checks before, behavioral standards during, and strict accountability after. A comprehensive system.
That seems to be the idea, yes. It was the Athenian way of trying to ensure that those entrusted with leadership embodied, or at least didn't flagrantly violate, the core civic virtues like sophrosyne and courage.
So stepping back from the details, what does this all really tell us? When we look at this whole Athenian model, the specific law against hubris, the graphe hybreos, combined with this relentless focus on character, on virtues like sophrosyne, on military courage, what's the big picture?
I think the big picture is that we're seeing a society where things like dignity and honor weren't just, nice ideas or philosophical points. They were treated as fundamental components of the political order. And they were actively, legally enforced through public debate, through the courts.
And the law against hubris specifically seems like a really crucial piece of that enforcement, a way to protect the democratic ideal.
Definitely. It functioned as this vital check on the powerful. It was the state essentially saying, look, we know there are differences in wealth and influence, but there's a line. You cannot use your power to humiliate a fellow citizen just because you can. It was the legal system affirming the basic equality of dignity, even amidst all the social striving and competition.
It sounds like a really delicate balance they were trying to strike, allowing all that intense ambition and rivalry, which seems central to their culture, but trying to keep it from boiling over into outright contempt and abuse that would destroy the community.
A very fragile balance, I think. And it shows that for the Athenians, law wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing after the fact. It was also deeply about education, about constantly reinforcing social norms. By putting hubris on trial again and again, they were continually debating and redefining what counted as acceptable behavior, especially for the elite. They were setting the moral tone.
But even with all this elaborate legal machinery, all these attempts to enforce honor and respect, our sources kind of leave us with this final, maybe unsettling thought, don't they, about the limits of what law can actually achieve.
Yeah, if you look at some of the deeper philosophical reflections, particularly in tragedy, like Aeschylus's Oresteia, which dramatized the very founding of Athens' legal court, there's still this lingering sense that not all suffering, not all injustice can be fixed by human institutions.
The sense that some things are maybe beyond human control.
Perhaps. Even after the goddess Athene establishes the law court on the Areopagus, promising reasoned justice, she herself paints this quite grim picture of human fate. She talks about a man who might be struck down by disaster, seemingly out of nowhere.
Right, the quote, "He does not know from where the blows of life come."
Exactly. Because the sins of past generations, ancient wrongs, still bring the Furies, these primal forces of vengeance, down upon him. The cycle of suffering isn't entirely broken just by creating law courts.
So that leaves us with a pretty provocative final question, doesn't it? Here's this Athenian system dedicating so much energy, so much legal innovation to enforcing mutual respect, protecting civic honor through laws like the graphe hybreos. But does that final tragic recognition suggest that the city, deep down, understands its own limitations? Does it concede that some wounds to human dignity, maybe from hubris that the courts missed, or maybe just from the sheer weight of historical fate, the sins of the fathers are ultimately beyond the power of law? That even the best designed democracy can't shield you from everything?
It's a powerful thought. Does the pursuit of justice always run up against forces older and maybe stronger than the city itself? Something to definitely mull over.